The hallway erupted into chaos before anyone understood what had happened, and Claire Morgan was already on the floor when the first security officer shouted for everyone to get down. Glass trembled in the nearby doors, alarms began screaming through the military hospital, and people who had spent their careers learning how to remain calm suddenly moved with the desperate confusion of civilians caught inside something they had never expected to see. Claire pressed herself against the wall, breathing too quickly, her face drained of color, while a uniformed officer pulled a weapon and ordered everyone away from the corridor. Then a quiet voice came from beside her. "Do not be afraid. I am here." It was Elena Brooks, a night shift nurse who had been carrying a tray of medications only seconds earlier. She did not run toward the nearest exit. She did not wait for someone more important to take charge. She simply lowered herself beside Claire, placed herself between the frightened woman and the open corridor, and spoke with the same gentle steadiness she used with patients waking from surgery. Claire stared at her as though she had lost her mind. Everyone else was shouting. Elena was whispering. And somehow that whisper was the only thing Claire could hear. The hospital had been designed to make people feel protected. Thick reinforced doors. Armed security. Cameras in every major corridor. Identification checkpoints. Restricted elevators. Yet within minutes, all those layers of protection had become meaningless, because someone had entered with information that only a very small number of people should have possessed. Claire was not an ordinary visitor. She was the younger sister of Rear Admiral Daniel Morgan, one of the most respected officers in the Naval Special Operations community, a man whose name carried weight in rooms where few people spoke above a whisper. Claire had come to the hospital that evening for what should have been a simple appointment, something private and routine, something that was never supposed to become national security business. Elena knew none of that when she first saw her. To Elena, Claire had simply been another woman sitting alone beneath fluorescent lights, twisting a silver ring around her finger and pretending she was not frightened. That was what Elena did better than almost anything else. She noticed fear before people admitted they were afraid. She noticed the patient who smiled too much, the elderly man who kept asking what time it was because he was afraid of being forgotten, the child who stopped crying whenever a particular nurse entered the room. Elena had worked nights for 8 years, long enough to learn that hospitals became different places after midnight. During the day, people talked loudly. Families arrived carrying flowers and coffee. Doctors hurried through corridors. At night, the building seemed to breathe differently. Every footstep sounded farther away. Every closed door seemed to hide a private sorrow. Elena preferred those hours. They were quieter. People showed more of themselves when they believed no one was watching. Earlier that evening, she had noticed Claire before anyone else seemed to. The woman had been sitting alone near the eastern waiting area, wearing a simple gray coat despite the warmth inside the building. Her hands were cold. Elena had brought her water without being asked. Claire had smiled politely and said she was fine. Elena had not believed her. She had simply said that people were allowed to be nervous in hospitals. Claire had looked at her for several seconds before quietly answering that she was not nervous about the appointment. She was nervous about being followed. Elena had remembered those words. Now, lying against the wall while security officers rushed past them, she remembered them again. The sound in the corridor suddenly stopped. For one suspended moment, there was only Claire's breathing and the faint electronic hum of the hospital lights. Elena leaned closer. "Look at me," she whispered. "Not the hallway." "Me." Claire obeyed. Her eyes were wide and wet. Elena kept her voice low and steady, asking her to breathe slowly. Somewhere beyond the locked doors, officers were shouting instructions. Somewhere farther away, a phone was ringing again and again. But Elena stayed exactly where she was. Then the security team moved through the corridor, and the danger appeared to pass. No one had been seriously injured, but the message was unmistakable. Someone had wanted Claire frightened. Someone had wanted her vulnerable. And someone had known precisely where she would be. Within 20 minutes, the hospital was sealed. Officers questioned staff members. Security footage was reviewed. Visitors were moved into secured rooms. Claire was taken to a private consultation suite, where Elena remained nearby despite being told that she could return to her regular duties. When the door opened, Admiral Daniel Morgan entered. He was taller than Claire, older by several years, dressed in a dark uniform that seemed almost too formal for the hospital corridor. He did not look frightened. Men like Daniel Morgan rarely allowed strangers to see fear. But Elena noticed his hands. His right hand tightened once around the edge of a folder before relaxing again. He looked at Claire first. Then at the officers. Then at Elena. "Who is she?" he asked. Claire answered before Elena could. "She stayed with me." Daniel looked at Elena for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. Elena nodded. She did not smile. She had already noticed something that bothered her. Daniel had entered the room expecting to find his sister terrified. Instead, his eyes immediately moved to Elena, as though he had been warned about her before they met. Later, while security officers searched the surrounding corridors, Daniel asked Elena where she had been when the incident began. She answered simply, "Eastern Corridor. Medication cart." He asked how long she had known Claire. Elena said that she had met her that evening. Daniel's expression changed slightly. "Then why did you know what to say to her?" Elena looked at him. "Because she was scared. That was all." Daniel did not appear satisfied. Neither was Elena. There was something about the attack that felt wrong. The intruder had not moved randomly. He had bypassed areas where security was heavier and appeared to know exactly which corridor Claire would use. More troubling still, someone had disabled one of the cameras for less than 2 minutes shortly before the incident. 2 minutes. Not enough time for an amateur. Too precise for coincidence. Elena returned to the nurse's station near midnight and found Claire's silver ring sitting on the counter. She had noticed the ring earlier, but now something about it caught her attention. There was a tiny engraved mark inside the band, almost worn away by years of use. Elena recognized the symbol. Her expression changed. She had seen it once before, years ago, on a photograph belonging to someone she had loved and lost. She touched the ring only once before pulling her hand away. She said nothing. She did not know whether the connection was real. She only knew that if it was, the attack on Claire had not begun that night. It had begun long before either woman entered the hospital. And when Elena looked through the glass wall toward the secured room where Claire sat beside her brother, she realized something that made the cold inside her chest feel heavier than fear. Claire had not been followed because of who she was. She had been followed because of something she knew. And somewhere inside that hospital, someone already knew that Elena had recognized it. By 2 a.m, the hospital had become a different kind of place. The bright corridors were nearly empty, the elevators moved only when security authorized them, and every nurse who passed the central desk seemed to glance over a shoulder before continuing. Claire remained inside the secured consultation room with her brother, while Elena stood outside reviewing medication records she had no reason to review except that something about the evening refused to settle inside her mind. The silver ring kept returning to her thoughts. So did the tiny mark engraved inside it. She had seen that symbol years ago, long before she became a nurse, on an old photograph that belonged to her older brother Thomas. Thomas had disappeared from her life after accepting a private security assignment overseas, and Elena had never been given a clear explanation for what happened afterward. She had spent years refusing to search for answers because she had learned that some doors were closed for a reason. But now the same symbol had appeared on Claire Morgan's ring, inside a hospital that had just been breached by someone who knew exactly where Claire would be. Elena closed the file in front of her. A security officer approached. "Admiral Morgan wants to speak with you." Elena followed him into the consultation room. Daniel stood beside the window while Claire sat quietly on the examination bed. She looked exhausted. Daniel held a photograph in his hand. He placed it on the table without speaking. Elena looked down and felt the air leave her lungs. It was an old photograph of 3 people standing outside a military facility. Claire was younger. Daniel stood beside her. And the third person was Thomas Brooks. Elena's brother. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Daniel finally asked how she knew the symbol. Elena looked at Claire, then back at him. I did not know it was connected to your family, she said. Daniel's expression hardened. Then how did you recognize it? Elena hesitated. Because my brother wore it. Claire looked up sharply. Daniel did not move. What was his name? Thomas Brooks. Daniel slowly lowered himself into a chair. Claire covered her mouth with one hand. The connection was no longer a suspicion. It was a thread running through both families. Daniel explained that Thomas had once worked with a specialized security team connected to one of his overseas operations. He had not been a Navy SEAL, but he had supported missions involving sensitive personnel and had been trusted with information that never appeared in ordinary reports. Years ago, Thomas had discovered that someone was leaking operational information to people outside the command structure. Before he could finish his investigation, he disappeared. Officially, his case remained unresolved. Unofficially, Daniel had spent years wondering whether Thomas had been silenced. Elena listened without interrupting. She wanted to believe there was an explanation that did not involve her brother's disappearance. But the hospital attack made that hope harder to hold. Claire finally spoke. Thomas saved my life once. Elena looked at her. Claire explained that when she was younger, she had accidentally witnessed a meeting connected to the investigation. She had been frightened and confused, and Thomas had quietly moved her away from the situation before anyone realized she had been there. Before leaving, he had given her the silver ring and told her never to remove it. Elena stared at the ring. Why? Claire shook her head. He never told me. He only said that if someone ever came looking for it, I should trust the person who asked me to remember why he gave it to me. Daniel looked at his sister with disbelief. You never told me that. Claire lowered her eyes. Thomas told me not to. The room went silent. Then Elena understood why the attack had felt so precise. Someone was not simply trying to frighten Claire. Someone was searching for the ring. Daniel immediately ordered another security sweep, but Elena stopped him. The person who attacked Claire already knew the hospital layout. If they were looking for the ring, searching every hallway would not solve the problem. It would only tell the attacker that they had succeeded in creating panic. Daniel stared at her. What do you suggest? Elena answered quietly. Find out who knew Claire would be here tonight. Daniel turned toward the security officer. Within minutes, the hospital administration began reviewing access logs. Only a handful of people had known Claire's exact appointment time. Her brother knew. Her physician knew. 2 hospital administrators knew. The scheduling coordinator knew. And 1 nurse had accessed Claire's files several hours before the appointment even began. Elena recognized the name. Margaret Ellis. She had worked at the hospital for almost 20 years. She had trained Elena during her first year as a nurse and had once defended her when a senior physician blamed her for a mistake she had not made. Elena trusted Margaret. That trust made the discovery hurt more than suspicion of a stranger ever could. Daniel wanted her questioned immediately. Elena asked him to wait. She remembered something from earlier that evening. Margaret had approached her near the medication station and casually asked whether Claire was still in the eastern waiting area. Elena had thought nothing of it at the time. Now the memory felt different. She also remembered Margaret wearing gloves even though the hospital corridor was warm. She remembered Margaret carrying a small black envelope. And she remembered the moment Margaret had looked toward Claire before quickly walking away. Daniel ordered security to locate her. They found Margaret near the underground parking entrance. She was not running. She was sitting alone inside her car, crying. When officers approached, she raised both hands. I did not hurt anyone, she said. But before they could question her further, every security phone in the hospital received the same message. You are looking in the wrong place. Daniel read it twice. Elena felt a chill move through her. Then another message appeared. Ask the nurse why Thomas Brooks trusted her. Elena looked at the screen. Her name was not written there, but she knew exactly who the message meant. Daniel turned toward her. What does that mean? Elena did not answer. Her mind had returned to something Thomas had once told her when they were children. He had been sitting at their kitchen table late at night, repairing the broken clasp on her school bag. He had looked at her, and said that sometimes protecting someone meant allowing them to hate you until the danger had passed. Elena had never understood those words. Not until now. She suddenly remembered a locked metal box in her apartment, a box she had not opened since Thomas disappeared. She remembered that inside it was an envelope he had left behind. She had never opened it because his final note had asked her to wait until someone came asking about the symbol. For years she had assumed that day would never come. Now it had. Daniel stepped closer. Elena, what did your brother leave you? She looked at him. Something I was told never to open. Claire whispered, then open it. Elena shook her head. If Thomas wanted it open now, there must be a reason. Daniel's expression changed. You think the person who attacked my sister knows about that envelope? Elena looked toward the security monitor. Margaret Ellis was being escorted upstairs. The lights in the underground garage flickered once. Then every monitor in the security room went black. For 3 seconds, the hospital disappeared into darkness. When the screens returned, one camera showed a figure standing outside the secured consultation room. The figure was wearing hospital clothing. No weapon was visible. No face could be seen. Then the figure slowly raised one hand and placed a folded photograph against the glass. Claire saw it first. She stopped breathing. Daniel turned. Elena stepped forward. The photograph showed Thomas Brooks standing beside Claire many years earlier. On the back, written in Thomas's handwriting, were 6 words that Elena recognized immediately. She was never the one I was protecting. The photograph remained against the glass long after the figure had disappeared from the corridor. Daniel stared at it as though the image had opened a door he had spent years trying to keep closed, while Claire sat motionless beneath the harsh hospital light, her fingers wrapped tightly around the silver ring Thomas had given her. Elena was the first to move. She walked to the glass, picked up the photograph, and turned it over again. She was never the one I was protecting. The words were unmistakably Thomas's. Elena read them twice, and then something inside her finally connected. The symbol on Claire's ring. The photograph. The strange message. The envelope waiting in her apartment. Thomas had not been protecting Claire because she possessed some dangerous secret. He had been protecting her because she was connected to the person who did. Elena looked at Daniel. It was not Claire, she said quietly. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Then who? Elena answered with a name she had never expected to hear again. Me. The room seemed to shrink around them. Daniel said nothing. Claire stared at Elena with tears gathering in her eyes. Thomas had known, years before his disappearance, that someone was monitoring his family. He had realized that the investigation was larger than one corrupt officer or one stolen piece of information. He had discovered that the people searching for the truth were willing to threaten anyone connected to it. Claire had been used as a distraction. The ring had been used as a decoy. Elena had been the person Thomas actually feared for. But why had he never told her? Because he knew she would try to find him. And Thomas had understood something Elena had not. Sometimes the safest way to protect someone is to let them believe they have been forgotten. The metal box in Elena's apartment suddenly mattered more than anything else in the hospital. Security officers escorted her there under Daniel's orders, while Claire remained in the protected room. Inside the apartment, Elena walked directly to the bedroom closet and pulled a small wooden case from behind a stack of old blankets. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was the envelope. It was yellow with age, sealed with a strip of black tape, and marked with the same tiny symbol engraved inside Claire's ring. Daniel stood behind Elena as she carefully opened it. Inside was a single page and a small memory card. The message was brief. Thomas explained that he had discovered evidence of an internal network selling confidential information through intermediaries. But the most dangerous discovery was not the network itself. It was the realization that people outside the organization had been helping them identify witnesses and remove anyone who could expose them. Claire had accidentally seen one of the transactions. Thomas had protected her, but he knew that eventually someone would realize she still possessed a piece of evidence they needed. He had given her the ring because it contained a hidden storage compartment, but the ring itself was only a decoy. The real evidence had been transferred years earlier to someone Thomas believed no one would suspect. Elena looked at the memory card. "Where is it?" Daniel asked. Elena remembered the symbol. She remembered the old photograph. She remembered Thomas repairing her school bag at the kitchen table. Then she understood. He had not hidden the evidence in the ring. He had hidden it in the one place connected to both families: the hospital records. Years earlier, Thomas had arranged for a sealed medical file to be stored under an alternate identity. Knowing that sensitive information would never be searched for inside a medical archive. The file belonged to a patient who had died before Elena ever began working at the hospital. Daniel immediately called the hospital administrator. The file was still there. But when they opened the archive room, they discovered something terrifying. The file had already been removed. Someone had known exactly where to look. Elena closed her eyes. The attacker had never been searching for Claire. They had been searching for Thomas's evidence. And now they knew Elena had found it. The lights in the archive corridor suddenly went out. Daniel ordered everyone to stay together. Security officers moved into position. Claire was brought from the consultation room under heavy protection. Elena stood beside her. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps somewhere beyond the darkness. Then the emergency lights came on. A figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. The hospital's security officer shouted for the person to stop. The figure did not. Everything happened quickly after that. Officers moved forward. Claire froze. Elena saw the direction of the movement before anyone else did. The threat was not coming toward her. It was coming toward Claire. Elena stepped between them. The sound that followed was sharp and brief. Claire screamed. Elena fell against her. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Daniel caught Elena before she hit the floor. She was conscious. Frightened. Breathing. But the wound was serious enough to require immediate treatment. The attacker was stopped, and within minutes the corridor filled with medical personnel. Yet even as doctors worked, Elena kept looking toward Claire. "Are you safe?" she whispered. Claire was crying. "Yes." Elena closed her eyes. Good. That was all she wanted to hear. Later, the investigation revealed that Margaret Ellis had never been the mastermind. She had been pressured into accessing Claire's records after someone threatened her son. The real conspiracy involved a former security contractor who had worked with people connected to Thomas's investigation. He had spent years trying to recover the evidence Thomas had hidden, believing it could expose him and others. The hospital attack had been an attempt to force Claire into revealing the location of the evidence. Elena had become the final obstacle only because Thomas had anticipated that one day someone would discover the truth. The memory card eventually provided enough information to expose the network. Names were confirmed. Records were recovered. Old cases were reopened. People who had spent years believing that Thomas had simply disappeared finally learned what had happened. But the greatest change occurred inside Daniel. For years he had believed that leadership meant being the person who carried every burden alone. He had believed that protecting people required strength, authority, and control. Elena had shown him something different. Courage could be quiet. Protection could come from someone without rank, without weapons, without recognition. Claire refused to let Elena return to ordinary life as though nothing had happened. During Elena's recovery, she visited every day. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply sat near the window. Claire eventually gave Elena the silver ring. Elena tried to refuse it, but Claire closed Elena's fingers around it. "Thomas gave it to me because he wanted me to remember who protected me," she said. "Now I want you to have it because I want you to remember that you were protected too." Elena looked down at the ring and smiled through tears. Daniel visited one final time before returning to duty. He stood beside Elena's hospital bed, removed the insignia from his uniform jacket, and placed it on the table. I spent my life believing the uniform made people brave, he said. Elena looked at him. It does not, she answered. People do. Daniel nodded because there was nothing more to say. The world would remember the investigation, the conspiracy, the recovered evidence, and the decorated Admiral who helped expose it. But Elena knew that none of those things were the reason she had stepped forward that night. She had not been thinking about medals or military ranks. She had seen a frightened woman and made a choice. That was all. Sometimes courage is not the absence of fear. Sometimes it is simply deciding that another person's fear matters more than your own. Months later, Elena returned to the hospital. The same corridors were there. The same fluorescent lights. The same quiet machines breathing behind closed doors. But something had changed. Claire was waiting near the entrance with a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of Thomas standing beside Elena when they were children, both laughing at something outside the frame. On the back, Claire had written a single sentence. He was right about you. Elena looked at the photograph for a long moment before placing it carefully inside her pocket. Then she walked down the corridor, past the rooms where strangers waited for someone to tell them everything would be all right. She had learned that people do not always remember the person who saved them because of what that person did. Sometimes they remember because, for one terrifying moment, someone looked at them and made them feel less alone. And if this story leaves anything behind, let it be that quiet truth, because somewhere tonight there may be someone afraid, someone exhausted, someone wondering whether anyone sees them, and sometimes the smallest act of compassion is enough to change the direction of a life. If this story meant something to you, pass it gently to someone who might need that reminder. Because in the end, the people who stand beside us in our darkest moments are often the ones who leave the brightest light behind.